So now we've heard how the signals might influence or how they can be used in a more corporate setting. Now we shall hear how it might be used in a startup world. We have an interview with Jasmina Pless, who is Head of Entrepreneurship at the Danish Chamber of Commerce. Jasmina has chosen two signals that she would like to explore. The first one is signal number 5, Cobots and Augmented collaboration. And signal number 6, corporate activism from the top. So let's hear what Jasmina has to say.
When you look at these signals that we have gathered, which one do you think is most important for the startup organizations to consider?
I think it's very important to, one of the signs that I really liked that you have pointed out is in relation to cobots and collaboration in between augmented reality and new technologies in general. And I think that it's really important for the startup world, especially because the startups, they can build these components as the core of their company. They can look into some new technologies that the big corporations might not have the knowledge and know-how or the energy to spend on these new technologies, but that's where the startups come in, and they build these new technologies that they can then collaborate with the big corporations and maybe sell these products to the big corporations.
So one thing is to build the cobots. How do these startups get the information to design them?
I think a lot of the startups that we see who build cobots and augmented reality for big corporations, they get inspiration from their daily life and from the problems that they see, and they can act on new trends much faster than big corporations. Some examples that we know here from Denmark is for example a company called Radiobotics, and they built like this AI, a component where they look at radiologist photos, and then they build a machine that can then help the radiologist, the doctors, on giving a really good estimate on what's the problem with this knee or whatever photo they're looking at.
It is really interesting that you point out the collaboration maybe between the bigger corporates and the smaller startups. How can these two worlds collaborate?
I think that's probably one of the most important things that startups can do. That is to create products that can work in collaboration with the big corporations, because that's where we can really change the ways that we work in society, and because the big corporations are obviously those companies that have a big impact on the world. And when the startups can come in with new technologies and new components, that's when we can push new trends even faster forward, when we can make the new technologies from the startups collaborate with the big organizations and big companies.
So with a possible multitude, with a number of possible futures that we can look into, who actually plays the most vital role in that? Is that the startups who gets the ideas and make the prototypes, or the big corporates who can take that into the regulated areas and scale it up? Who actually drives the futures?
I think both drives the futures. The startups drives the futures by creating and getting the ideas for the new products and new technologies. But the big corporations, they have a really big impact as well, because they are the ones who needs to have an open mind and to take in these new technologies. It's probably the easiest for a big organization or a big company to just avoid any noise from smaller companies and just move forward with those old technologies that they've always been using. But so it takes a lot for the big companies to have an open mind and to create the infrastructure in the big organizations to take in these technologies. And often it's a matter of trying the new technologies out and sometimes failing. and testing it, it might not be a perfect fit to begin with. So it takes risk and it takes curiosity from the big corporations to check out these technologies from the startups. And that collaboration is what is driving the future forward.
I can easily see that you, in your role, is a gift with also with all the people that you work here for the entrepreneurship, for the startup environment. But how do you actually help the big corporates? How do you facilitate that cooperation? Because I can easily imagine that for a big corporate to actually pause and look at the startups and start collaborating will be a hindrance for them.
Absolutely. It's a big hindrance for the big corporations if they don't have the infrastructure yet in order to collaborate with the startups. What we try to do is inspire the big corporations. That's probably the best thing we can do. We can take the good examples from some corporates that's been good at creating these collaborations. I've looked into various ways that big corporations can collaborate with startups. Like one example is that you can simply open up, make like your own infrastructure in the company that basically have like an email address that isn't info@novozymes.com, but you have like a point of departure where the startups can enter, an entry point for the startups. So it can be like an innovation lab, for example, or just some people who are capable of grabbing these new ideas and implementing them and selling them to the right departments in the company. It can also be creating a corporate venture fund. Mm-hmm. So investing directly into startups that often has something to do with that specific field that the big corporation is working with. Then they invest into these companies and probably use that technology in their own company in one way or another.
And that kind of ecosystem, is that something that you see trending? Is that new or is that established already?
Absolutely. I think especially corporate venture capital, which is these venture funds owned by corporates are called. That's a huge trend that we can see, especially in America, especially in the UK, but also in Denmark. We see a lot more big companies who invest in startups. Sometimes to gain a profit, but just as much to get access to this new technology. Because I think we're all seen, and the management of large corporation has also, they've seen how you need to develop, you need to evolve and focus on the new technologies and take it in, because otherwise you're gonna be run over by new technologies and you're gonna be obsolete in the future. So it's really great to see that a lot of big corporations is taking this the technological development serious and wanting to engage and interact with new technologies, with the technologies from the startups. And that obviously helps the startups as well, because often they need the big corporations to test their products. If it's a product that needs to be tested together with a big company, then they need someone to take that risk to begin with. So it's just all about beautiful collaboration, really. We need risk and action from both sides.
Beautiful collaboration. I really like that. How is the Danish startup scene different compared to the other startup scenes that you meet?
I think we're lucky in Denmark that we always talk about like the flat hierarchy. Mm-hmm. And I think that's also really important when it comes to collaboration between startups and corporates. I think it's much easier for a startup, despite it being difficult. Despite that, it's easier in Denmark to get access to the right people. That's often the problem, to get access to the right person sitting in that right department in the big company. And I think that's easier in Denmark because we're a small country, and maybe you know someone who knows someone, or you can find them on LinkedIn and they want to drink a coffee with you. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a plus. And what I'm really happy that we see at the moment is big companies coming to me wanting to collaborate with startup, wanting to get these new ideas. And that makes it, of course, a lot easier for me to link the startups with the big companies. Mm-hmm. Because the startups are often very eager to meet the big companies, but what we've been missing is the eagerness from the big companies to engage with the startups.
And that is new over the past how many
10
years?
years?
10 years?
Probably new over the last 10 years, yeah. That we see an active engagement from the big companies in wanting to explore new technologies within their field, and seeing how they can make sure that they stay relevant and implement new technologies so they can stay competitive.
And it's interesting that you point out that time frame, because as I see it, as looking into the possible futures and scanning the trends and signals, there's definitely something going on, or has been going on over the past 10 years, especially driven by technology. Looking at the signals right now, we see that it's both driven by technology and society. Can you feel that it's not only technology driven, that staying relevant to the market is also something about people?
Absolutely. I think if we look at one of your other trends that you point out, corporate activism from the top, I think that's super relevant as well. It's something where we see a need not only for wanting new technologies, but also staying relevant for society. I think if we look back 10 years, for example, most companies could stay behind the scenes. They could just do their little business, run everything with a corporate mindset of making shareholders happy and live a happy life like that. Today, that doesn't work that way anymore. We have so many movements within society, and the lines between your corporate life and your private life has become more intertwined. And trends such as Me Too and making sure you have a good CSR strategy, staying on top of climate focus. All these trends are super important for the employees, which makes it important for the employers as well, and for the management of the companies.
So the business of business is not only business, it's also making sure that the society is taken care of, and that you have a position maybe in the political landscape also?
Absolutely. It's very important for companies nowadays, at least to a higher degree, to be political relevant. And I think back in the days, you didn't have to necessarily engage in politics, but now you don't really have the choice of not engaging. So we both see probably the management being pushed into engaging in the society and the political life, but we just as much see that they're probably wanting to engage in the political life more often than before. I think we see more CEOs and more people from the management engaging in political causes that may have some relevance to their business, but maybe not. It could also be that we see the management engaging in I guess saving the climate is relevant for all of us, but it might not be relevant for one particular company, but then the CEO can still have some idea or some values that are driven towards this cause and wanting to engage in political actions within this field. Or it can be wanting to help entrepreneurs. Like we see some CEOs from large companies that maybe because they started their business many years ago, and being an entrepreneur, they want to give back to society, and then they engage in helping young entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs. And I think that's really interesting to see that that's a political cause as well, or a CSR cause, depending on how you look at it. But it's important nowadays that the management engage and take a stand in society and have a voice, and we see that trending more and more.
So you pulled out two of these signals. How do you think a small startup could, in the best possible way, engage in these signals? How could they use this gathering of signals?
I think it's super important for startups to stay aware of how society is changing and the signals that we see from the future. And probably the startups have that advantage that they can more easily act on these signals, whereas big companies, they would probably have to have a big strategy, like some 5-year plan or something, and probably pay a lot of money for a consultancy to create this plan or strategy. And so they act a lot slower on trends, whereas startups, they can much more easily act on new trends that we're seeing, or even micro trends, something that's trending for season or something like that. That's something that startups can much easier act on than corporates. So that gives the startups a competitive advantage on staying super relevant for the future.
That I can easily see, that startups has the agility to change the technology or the course of the product or product line. But some of the startups that I meet, their bandwidth is just filled with customers and with sales and with cash flow, and not having necessarily the time to also reflect and change courses based on like these signals. How can you help them in that?
That's right. Of course, when you're running your company, you have that to focus on as your primary focus. But I think a lot of the management in these startups, they are quite good at looking at the trends in society and acting on it. But that's for sure. Here at the Chamber of Commerce, we also help startups coming in and hearing about new trends, or we write about new trends, and in that way they can get inspiration for the future.